Hello everyone, how's it going? My name is Brian and I'm the author of Fundamentals of C and C++ Game Programming. Hope you're all fit and well today. We're ready to have a bit of fun on your coding journey. This particular video is a wee bit specialised because we're going to talk about the issues we now face in 2025 using a Raspberry Pi 3. The first edition of Fundamentals came out in 2018 and focused primarily on that. The basic issue is that the Pi 3 was great in its day and I really loved writing the code for that first book. It was simple and easy to introduce you all to the OpenGL ES 2.0 system. Now, a lot of early readers got on well with the content and I saw some lovely examples of the work, but time goes on, the Pi 3 was superseded by the much more powerful Pi 4. And despite my confident statement in the book that the Pi 4 would not be massively different from the Pi 3, it was quite a bit different. But we don't need to go into all the differences. The main one was a much better GPU system with a more powerful OpenGL 3.1, which was great. But it stopped using Broadcom's Disman X libs, which is a problem because the Pi 3 effectively used those. The original book relied heavily on it, and all those lovely BCM libs were stripped out of the Pi 4's OS, so the Pi 4 couldn't run the code as it was originally set up. Now, I did push some updates to allow the Pi 4 to run, but the book was starting to show its age, and it was only really used by Pi 3 users. So for a while, the Pi 3 could continue to use old-style Raspbian OS with BCM libs. No big deal, the book code still worked. Problem is, the newer style Raspberry OS, which was for the Pi 4, started to take over, and in time, even the Pi 3 started to use Raspberry OS, and the code I provided died off. The book, sadly became outdated and the code deprecated. The support site couldn't keep up. Now, it was still possible to use the bulk of the game code in the book, but the startup and setup for OpenGL and some other things just won't work anymore. And asking total beginners to do strange, new technical things seemed a bit harsh. I explained how to do all this in the forums, but even those updates became hard to maintain. So here we are, 2025, with a second edition of the book. Good stuff. While writing it, I altered the targeting systems a bit and how we think about the way it was possible to get the Pi 3 to use most of the code as long as we didn't try to use the more powerful OpenGL 3.1. I am dead chuffed to say that the Pi 3 can be used again using the Raspberry OS based on Bookworm, that's Debian Bookworm, and hopefully the later versions. Sadly though, the previous version's Bullseye and Buster just can't handle it. Now, there are changes. There have to be. That's the progress. We just have to live with it. In the new code, I've stripped the BCM libs out and moved over to a more stable xlib display system. And I've also removed the Visual GDB plugin so that we can now use simple and free Visual Studio for Linux. Some people didn't like paying for the Visual GDB. Fair enough. And the big thing, as you'll soon see, we now have a dual boot system that allows us to run on PC as well as the Pi. This will make development quite a bit faster as well because the Pi 3, is quite slow at building projects. So we can make the first edition work again. And up to a point, you can also use the Pi 3 for the second edition, at least until it starts using OpenGL 3.1. But then you can switch to the PC-only options and just test it out as if it was a Pi 4 or Pi 5. And use one of them when you get one. And before you say it, yes, Wayland is the future. I know. I will be able to incorporate Wayland soon, but right now it's just not currently quite ready for us. Watch the support sites for updates on that. So we're going to switch to my coding cave and I'll explain what's been changed and how the new projects for the Pi 3 will be familiar, but a little bit different in how they fire up.
Hello and welcome to the boring code bit. We're going to take a quick look at the old code from edition 1 and explain how it compares to the newer code systems that we have to use now. The older code was written back when Raspbian OS was dominant and it made use of Broadcom's BCM libraries, which included Disman X. Have a look at that there. Now, Disman X provided the draw context for all the older code display systems, and it also gave us a few speed saving tricks to allow the Pi 3 to work on a lower resolution and scale things up, so it doubled its speed. It was pretty cool at the time. But the Raspberry OS was slowly replaced by Raspberry OS, which is now the standard used on Pi 4 and Pi 5. And it didn't have the BCM libs. Instead it used a more traditional X11 display system, which was actually still in place on the Pi 3 at the time, but I didn't use it. So let's have a quick look at the older code here. Here you can see the old hello triangle system. It's actually quite messy, since I made the point in the book that I was also learning OpenGL 2 at the same time as you, and I wanted to keep some common tutorial code available, which I got from the OpenGL ES 2.0 programming guide. But with hindsight I could have made it cleaner because I knew how. Here you can see the BCM libs, BCM host, and also the distman content is used there, and further down in the initialization of the OGL display, which is here and down here as well. Oh, there. Distman elements. Now, these files and libs need to be on the Raspberry itself to run, and they were originally, but after the Raspberry OS came in, they're no longer there by default, and we're a bit stuck. It was possible to download and install them for a while, but later updates also made that impossible. I'll put my camera on for a second. Okay. Yeah, no. There we go, hi. So we could do that. Also, later updates to other functions made updates and stopped supporting BCM libs, and we just couldn't use them anymore. So we're stuck with code that used to work and now doesn't. That's a bit of a bummer. But let's break this down. The only real issue we have here is initializing and rendering to our OpenGLS display. Now that's not the hardest thing to fix. In fact, I provided some early code for non-Raspberry users to get code running on different SBCs. So we know it can be done, but the book was written for the Pi 3 and the OS became more distant from the original version and the code just didn't seem to be the same anymore. It was impossible to keep up. I focused instead on dealing with individual requests for help. Then in 2024, I was asked to produce a second edition, which allowed me to reconsider the options available, and most importantly, provide new ways to run the same content on Raspberry OS, which opened the possibility of building almost everything on Pi 3 as well, as long as it was also using Raspberry OS. Now, I can't replace everyone's edition 1 copy with a second edition, but I can explain to you what is different and provide you with some new code that will get the edition 1 demos working again. And here it is. We've got a new template. I'll just take my picture off now. I've created a new basic template which does indeed initialize and render OpenGLS to the much more general X11 display, and I've also removed the dependence on Visual GDB. You'll see the 3 projects in the solution. Our common code is held in our project here, and you'll find the Pi setup here. Also, really cool, you'll find a Windows setup. The new system has allowed me to make it possible to produce a PC build as well, which emulates a Pi, since isolating the OpenGL ES initialization meant I could create a display context any way I wanted, and the code simply worked with it. So here, for example, we'll set things up so that we can run this on a PC. It's quite straightforward. I just tell it I want to use this as the startup project, and I'm going to build to an x64 system, and when that's just finished registering itself, it just takes a few seconds, we can run this, and boom, we get it running on the PC. See, it says PC based OpenGL ES. So we've got that, we can make that work. That's quite cool. And if we want to run it on the Raspberry, we can set this to be the Raspberry version, set as the startup project. This time it's running on an ARM64, and we will just wait again for the registration to finish. It does do a little bit of internal shuffling around. There we go, now it's ready. You wouldn't necessarily switch between one and the other constantly. You would probably switch at the end of the day just to check the other versions work. And so that you can see it, I will put the Pi capture screen on here, and you can see there's a Pi running the triangle code. And this is a Pi 3, which is, you know, running everything we want. You can see there, and it's very small, but that's a Pi 3. Cool. Let's stop that. Now, we're only going to use the PC build for convenience. They do build much faster and you don't need to be connected to a Pi, but do make the effort to run the Pi builds as often as you can to experience hitting performance limits. The PC will simply laugh at any attempt to stress it out, but you must choose what version of the code you want to run before you build it. I'll put my camera back on. In the chapter videos, I will explain each setup as we go along so that you can figure out what you're doing, and just make sure you choose the correct startup project in correct configuration. Now, one thing though, having two targets creates a tiny issue with handling keys and mouse input, since Windows and Linux do that a bit differently. So to keep things clean and tidy, I created these two separate boot systems which set up OpenGL and specific key and mouse handlers. And they do this in different ways. The Windows version uses GLFW to set up OpenGL, and it uses uses the GLFW key read systems, and the Raspberry uses X11 key read systems and standard OpenGL EGL setup. The complicated bits you can look into later. Now, I felt this was a good idea because I had a few issues with my older Pi key handling systems when people were using certain types of wireless keyboard. It wasn't always possible to read them with the old system. I don't really know why. Some mouse type keyboards just refuse to connect. So now we ask X11 for the key and mouse data. It's much more generic and is far more reliable. So I've abandoned the old input system. These setups occur before the code finds its way to the main bits of our project, which run the same way, more or less, as they did before, with only a little change in the way the keys are read, and in some cases like Hello Triangle, where I've cleaned the code up a little bit. So, most of the first edition book code, as printed, isn't going to match the newer versions of the code you download. You should still see the core game or demo content is all there, including some of the deliberate and not so deliberate mistakes. All the main code is now downloadable, so you don't have to type in the original startup code, even though it was a very good practice for you back in the day. This particular example, as I say, is for the Pi 3, which must be running Bookworm or higher, and all the Edition 1 code examples should work fine on a Pi 3 with that OS. It's only using OpenGL 2.0. There are also Pi 4 versions on the site, which are basically the same, only the initialization is set to OpenGL ES 3.1, and you can twiddle that when you understand what's happening. Now, please do consider this about the PC builds. They are just emulating a Pi for convenience in these tutorials. PCs are capable of a lot more impressive stuff when you run them as full OpenGL or DirectX beasts. That's something you can explore when you've pushed the limits of your Pi and you want to go further. I have added, and from time to time will update, new video content to the website to talk you through the Edition 1 chapters using the new template. And of course you can also buy the second edition and gain access to some of the newer OpenGL ES content in that. Thanks for watching. Let's go back to the fat Scottish bloke behind the desk.
Okay, well, I hope that's all clear. If not, all you have to do is go to the support site at www.scratchpadgames.net, Scratchpad Games all one word, and check out the different sections there. If you can't find what you're looking for, sign up to the forums and ask your question. Actually, just sign up anyway. It'll be great to hear from you and how you're getting on and to get some updates on your progress through whichever book you're using. Thanks for watching. Please do the like and subscribe bits, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.